Bienvenido y bienvenida a Diseña tu vida, un espacio para conectar contigo mismo, con tus sueños, tu creatividad, tu bienestar y con tus metas. Diseñar tu vida es un concepto que toma en cuenta todo aquello que es valioso para ti, que te hace único, irrepetible, para que puedas crear la vida de tus sueños, auténtica y con bienestar, y además diseñar un trabajo que genere un impacto positivo y que te traiga abundancia. Diseña tu vida nace para que el desarrollo personal sea accesible, para que no pongas en pausa tu bienestar ni tu crecimiento y que sentirte más feliz con quien eres tú esté a tu alcance. Aquí vas a aprender sobre bienestar, negocios, cambios de perspectiva y escuchar historias que pueden aportar positivamente a tu vida. Mi nombre es Gabriela Ceballos, soy la primera Life Design Coach de habla hispana, fundadora de The Life Experiment, estratega de mindfulness, bienestar y negocios, y soy tu host en este podcast. Gracias por estar aquí. Hoy te invito a diseñar el proyecto más importante de todos, tu vida. Saliendo de una conversación, la verdad como creando esto antes de compartir de qué se trata este episodio, pero tuve una conversación tan bonita con Ezra Bookman que ahora creo que lo puedo llamar, es un amigo, es un diseñador de rituales. Y el día de hoy esta conversación va a ser en inglés. Así que estoy tan feliz por poder compartir contigo toda la sabiduría de Ezra, lo que nos contó el día de hoy, qué es un ritual, qué no es un ritual, qué tiene que ver el ritual y la espiritualidad, cómo hacerlos parte de nuestro día a día. Y disfruta la conversación. And now I'm going to be talking in English. I'm so excited about this first conversation with someone in Diseña tu Vida in the podcast. I had the opportunity to talk to Ezra Bookman, an amazing person, a recognized ritual designer in the US. And now, if you're hearing this, maybe in Ecuador too, he's an artist, a facilitator exploring the transformational power of ritual. He's the founder of Ritualist, a creative studio helping leaders cultivate more conscious companies and connected communities. In this conversation, you're going to learn more about who is Ezra, a little bit about his background, and also what's a ritual, why a ritual is important, what are the don'ts of rituals, and some ideas for you to start designing your own in your day-to-day or in some special moments in your life. So be comfy, grab a coffee, and listen to this conversation. So welcome everybody. If you're hearing this is gonna be our first episode in English, and we have a great person, a great human. I have someone in front of me here in my Zoom right now, and we're gonna meet Ezra. Ezra is a nationally recognized ritual designer in the US. He's an artist, a facilitator exploring the transformational power of ritual. He's the founder of Ritualist, a creative studio helping leaders cultivate more conscious companies and connected communities. Ezra, how are you? Welcome.
Oh, thank you. It's such an honor to be your first English language guest. I'm sorry, everyone. If we did this in Spanish, there wouldn't be a lot to talk about.
It would be maybe a mess.
Yeah.
Ezra, for the ones that don't know you, can you talk about that? Who is Ezra?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably like the biggest and most profound question in the world, right? So, yeah, I mean, you talked a little bit about what I do, which is not who I am. But yeah, I think who I am, I'm a heretic. Like I love being subversive and always exploring and thinking about like whatever everyone is doing, like how do I do it differently? How do I tweak it and reimagine it? I would say that's really core to who I am. And I'm a person who thinks really like big existential questions of like thinking about like who I am is like the biggest question ever. and why am I? Those kinds of questions are the ones that really animate me.
I'm really interested about your story because there's one thing, like one side that we see maybe we go to your website and we see now the ritualist and the things you've achieved. But I want to know where were you a few years ago? Like, how did it all begin and how did it evolve? I think it's part of also understanding who you are and
Mm.
why this work is important right now.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that question. I think where it began actually my when I was young, actually what I always wanted to be in theater. I really actually wanted to be a backup dancer for Britney Spears, but like, I quickly realized that that dream wasn't going to come true. And I dedicated myself to theater and performance art and directing. And by the time I was already in college, I got really interested in the intersection of arts and spirituality and the way that sort of all of our artistic practices have their roots in ritual and spiritual practices. And so I got a research grant. I went to South America and got to spend a few months traveling through and around indigenous communities in South America and exploring that question and thinking about how do we train artists to create work that is spiritually transformational, not only for the audience, but also for themselves. And what happens when we set that as the goal for art. Long story short, I wound up in New York working at a community called Lab Shul, which was and is an experimental, artist-driven, everybody-friendly, God-optional pop-up Jewish community, sort of like a synagogue, but trying to like reinvent in every way, what that means for the modern world. And there, was able to basically create new rituals every day and reimagine old ones and work a lot with artists and refine my design process around ultimately the question, like, why are some rituals better than others or more impactful than others? Why are some rituals so transformational and why are some rote and repetitious and boring, we fall asleep during? What's the difference between that? And how do we train all of us, because we're all involved with ritual, how do we train them to create better and more impactful and meaningful and memorable rituals? So I left Lab Shul, started Ritualist a few years ago, and have been doing that ever since, living the life of a professional ritual designer, whatever that means.
And that was actually, you're the first person I know now that does that. That's why I was actually scrolling online, like in Google, reading articles, and suddenly, I don't know how, I found your article and I was like, I've never heard about this. And I think this is needed, like the profound way that you talk about rituals and spirituality and how to reimagine things that maybe we're just used to doing, and then just thinking outside the box with this also like sense of this is very sacred, like now what we're doing, maybe if it's a ritual. So Ezra, what, like, is this the way you pictured how you were gonna finish college and how you were gonna be, I don't know how old are you, but maybe 10 years away from college? Or was this in your path, or this is totally like outside of what you pictured?
Mm. It's totally outside of what I pictured, and yet totally makes sense at the same time. I was singularly focused on a life as a theater and performance artist from the time I was probably 12. And went to a special high school and got a BFA for college. That was, I really only saw myself in a pretty narrow um, career path. And so, and yet I can recognize that throughout all of the twists and turns and all the weird things that I have gotten myself into over the last decade, that and longer, that this question of how does transformation happen? What are the experiential conditions for transformation? That has woven throughout my work and has really remained a constant. And it's manifested in different ways and different jobs and titles. But that's always the question that has really driven my work. So I see what I'm doing now. I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. And
Mhm.
also, like, it's the heretic in me that gets to say, like, so much of what we think about ritual, um, we have so many misconceptions about ritual across the world right now that are holding people back from really receiving that kind of deep, meaningful experience and integrated experience of life. And so that really is driving my work right now of wanting to bring a new vocabulary into the world around, what are rituals actually, and why are they important? And then ultimately, how do you go about designing them and designing them better?
And now that you've said it, I'm really interested to know, like, what are those common misconceptions you've encountered when people now discover your work? Like, what do they think about rituals that's not ritual? Like,
Yeah, it's a great question. I could talk a lot about this. Quickly, I would say, I think there's three main misconceptions. One is that rituals are inherently sacred or spiritual. It's not true. They are special though, right? They don't have to be sacred. They just have to be special, elevating out of the mundane into the extraordinary, from the ordinary to the extraordinary. So, if you're not a religious person or even a spiritual person, there are still rituals that you are doing in your life that matter. The example that I give a lot, and I'm not sure if they have this in South America, but in the States, there's this thing called the golden cancer-free bell. And it's used a lot in children's wards in cancer children hospitals. And when you finish your treatment, you get to ring the cancer-free bell that's on the floor. And there's all kinds of sort of rituals and ceremonies that people do around it. And it's deeply meaningful and impactful for people involved and for the other kids that are on the floor who hear the bell, ringing in the distance and say, oh, I can get better. This is not forever. But it is not connected to any, religious ideology. So there's that. I would say the second misconception is that rituals need to be repeated in order to be rituals. That's not true. The first time you do a ritual, it's still a ritual, even if you never do it again. And really every tradition started as an innovation at some point. And then the third misconception is that rituals are these highly structured, very rigid sort of structures. You got to do it exactly this way, but that just doesn't bear out in the research. Rituals are constantly being invented and reinvented, tweaked and changed over the course of history. And that's how they stay relevant and meaningful in our lives.
yeah.
Yeah.
So,
And there's maybe one thing, there's a quote, Emil Durkheim, who's a thinker and philosopher on ritual, and an anthropologist wrote, rituals are these sites of collective effervescence. And I've always said, collective effervescence is a hard thing to script, rigidly. There's something about the ritual space that is ultimately alive and in the moment. And that exists outside of rigid structure.
and very intentional, I would say. When you're talking about rituals, I love it because I would picture, yes, a ritual has to be repetitive, and maybe if I did it once, I need to do it again, but just maybe with the intention of being there in the present moment, and that it could evolve. This ritual can evolve in the future to become another thing, maybe.
Yeah. There's a colleague of mine, Charles Vogel, says, it's a ritual if you take it away and the moment feels less important.
Mm.
And there's a kind of simplicity to that, where even at the end of this call, if we did a little thing to say goodbye, we might never be on a call again with each other. But if we slow down and extend some gratitude to each other, we've brought some ritual into the moment. And yeah.
And now that you're here, Ezra, and talking about this topic and how passionate you are about rituals, can you tell me and tell us why rituals? What's the difference between a ritual and a routine, the things that I do in my day to day? How can we understand more what is a ritual?
Yeah. I would need a good hour to really dive into and split all these things out. I also like to use the language of habits and traditions because those get conflated as well. Um, there's a Esther Perel, another colleague of mine and a brilliant therapist, has this quote that I love. She says, routines get you through life. routines get you through the day, rituals get you through life. And so I could get really into like the details and specifics. I have different definitions for rituals, routines, habits, and traditions. But ultimately, rituals are these intentional, symbolic actions that heighten importance, impact, or meaning. Intentional, symbolic actions that heighten importance, impact, or meaning. And each one of those elements of my definition are really important. Intentional, I talk about the 3 Ps. It's purposeful, personal, and particular. So I ask people, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? And why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? What's your purpose? Why are you doing this? What's your personal connection to it? And why are you doing this? Why this particular thing of all things that you could be doing to get that purpose, that why this thing? So that's intentionality. And symbolic is that there's something about a ritual that is not directly instrumentally purposeful or functional. So there's something about a ritual that doesn't fulfill like a direct instrumental purpose. There's a researcher that says it's causally opaque. So, like this morning, I was making my morning oats for my partner who happens to have COVID right now. And, we eat this breakfast, the same breakfast every morning. And for the last couple mornings, I've been like arranging the fruit on top of the bowl really beautifully, like in like layers and different colors, and just like making it nice because, well, one, her life is so boring right now. She's like stuck in her room, right? And there's very little. So I want to bring a little pop, a little bit of color, a little bit of specialness into her life. And also this is like the one point of connection that we have right now is me bringing her food. And I want to communicate, I love you, I care about you, I'm thinking about you. And taking a little bit of extra time to do this thing of making the fruit look beautiful, it serves no function, no purpose, right? Either way, the fruit's going in there and she's eating it. But it elevates it. It makes it feel a little bit more meaningful or important or special. And that's ritual.
I love that. I love that example also. Can you, do you see the relationship between a ritual and well-being? Well-being, understanding this thing that allows us to feel more satisfied and more fulfilled in our lives.
Yeah. I think that I think all rituals help us slow down, right? Anything that we're doing, if we add a ritual to it, it takes a little bit longer to do. Like if right before eating, I take 3 breaths and take a moment of gratitude for the earth and all the people that work to feed me. My meal just got longer. And I think in a world in which we are so pulled thin and where there is so much distracting us and keeping us out from the present moment that we're in, rituals are friction. It's this kind of countercultural tool that we can use to interrupt all that distraction and all that speed and all that the monologue of scarcity and you're not good enough and you don't have enough and bring you and slow you down into the present moment. And I think that gratitude is one of the most profound influences on our well-being. And also, as the research shows, it's also our connections and our relationships. And rituals are one of the best tools that we have for forming deep relationships with one another, connecting with each other across time and space, and elevating and upholding relationships in our life as important. So I would say for both that, for gratitude and for relationships, rituals can be a great tool for taking whatever you're doing to, help your well-being and taking it to the next level.
Like, is a ritual meant to be shared with someone else, like in a collective? It's gonna be more powerful, or I can also do it by myself to connect with myself.
Both. Yeah, both. Rituals are, you can do it on your own. You can do it with one other person, and you can do it with the whole world. You can also do it across time and space, which is really interesting. That rituals, by doing a ritual, I can feel connected to everyone that has done the ritual before and everyone that will do the ritual in the future, and to sort of widen your circle of belonging and your sense of timelessness outside the present moment. I say like rituals often help us zoom in and zoom out, zoom into the present, get really like aware of what we're doing, where we are, and also zoom out and feel the expansion and a sense of connection to something that is bigger than us, whether that is your family, your community, your country, your own deepest values, your own ethics, um, certainly God or the universe, Mother Earth, whatever it is, but something that is bigger than you. And it's a feeling that I think is ultimately core to living a fully integrated life, and a life of well-being is sort of zooming out from yourself.
I love what you've mentioned. And also, I do believe that does relate to spirituality, even though you don't need to have a religion, but rituals feel spiritual. Is that right? Or you said before that that was a misconception, or I'm just like strengthening a misconception of a ritual?
Yeah, I mean, like that, like those oats, right? There was nothing spiritual necessarily about that. I think that when we zoom out to and feel connected to something bigger than ourselves, there's a lot of different ways that we can interpret that feeling. And for some of us, we interpret that through a language or an understanding of spirituality, or religious beliefs. But for some of us, we don't. And I think that both are valid. So or like a graduation ceremony, right, is not necessarily spiritual in any way. But if you talk to all those kids who didn't get to have their graduation ceremony because of COVID, and ask them whether something felt lacking, missing from their graduation, whether exiting high school or college felt less important or meaningful without that ceremony, even though, for what it's worth, most graduation ceremonies totally need to be redesigned by a ritual designer. But it's still a ritual. It might not be a very good one, but it's still a ritual. And so, I think that spirituality is one lens in which we interpret the meaning and that sense of the beyond that a good ritual can connect us to.
Great. Thank you for the acceleration, or I don't know how to say that in English. Thank you for making it better. And Ezra, do you have what are the don'ts of rituals? Do you know this is not really, these are the don'ts? Don't make this if you're trying to create a ritual for you.
Oh, wow. I've never been asked that question. Yeah, I don't have an immediate answer to that. I feel like it's a playful space, so I'd rather people felt expansive and playful in their ritual exploration. I would say don't be too rigid and closed-minded. Feel free to explore and experiment, and if you don't get it right the first time, or if it doesn't feel right, try again, try something new. I would say don't keep the fluorescent lights on, turn the lights down, light some candles, put on a lamp. I think transformation, it's really hard for transformation to happen under fluorescent lighting. So I would say maybe that's my one rule about creating ritual space. So don't be too dogmatic, be inclusive. If you're doing it with other people, include them in the process. And also, from a wider perspective, ritual is ultimately a neutral tool, right? As much as I'm a big believer and lover of ritual, it's a neutral tool in the sense that it's a powerful tool, but it can be wielded, as we have all seen, in all kinds of manipulative, coercive, ways. And depending on what your intention is and what your values are. And if you look at, if you look at cults, if you look at, even in corporate settings, places like WeWork, that have these kind of ritualistic elements to their culture that ultimately were quite manipulative and used a lot of spiritual bypassing. So, recognize that that ritual is a neutral tool, and it really, it's not inherently good just because you're doing a ritual. It really matters why you're doing it and what your intention is.
That was so powerful, Ezra, and give us a lot of clarity on maybe if you're listening and thinking about doing a ritual or creating something at home for your day-to-day, how to make it. So now I'm actually interested in, could you share, Ezra, some of your personal rituals, or maybe something that, could you give us a difference, like a ritual that you have once in a while and something that you do more frequently, and it's also a ritual?
It's so funny. Whenever I get asked this, like my mind always goes blank, right? It's like, it's like trying to hold the ocean in your hands and then you're like, and it all spills out. I like always forget, like, what are all the rituals that I do? I think I live my life very ritualistically, so it's sometimes hard to differentiate. You know, and also, there's a lot of, my real compulsion here is to encourage people to create rituals for themselves and not to copy someone else, because there's a lot of that content online of like, do this, feel that kind of rituals. And so like you can check out my Instagram page, or my Twitter, or my website, at ritual_ist, ritualist. And I'm posting examples of things that I do in my life there, often more as inspiration and less as like, declaration or prescription, just to inspire people to ritualize their lives. So I would check that out. But the one that I actually come back to the most, I think, is a ritual before eating. And I don't do it all the time, right? Like I forget or I'm too busy. But as much as I can before eating, I like to close my eyes and take at least 3 breaths, minimum 3 breaths. And I usually, with each breath, find room in my mind and in my heart for gratitude for something. And what that is always changes, and depending on where I am. I like to sort of locate myself. Where am I as I eat? I try to think about all the people that have worked to feed me. When you really think about a single meal, it could be thousands and thousands of people that have, had a role in that. And usually, when I'm eating with my partner, we open our eyes, and when both of us, have opened our eyes, we look at each other and we say, "I'm grateful for you," or just grateful. And that's a really sweet way of starting our meal.
Love that. I was like, oh, that sounds sweet, but also like you started to slow down and speak slower, like when you were talking about the ritual.
Yeah.
And Ezra, for the people that are wondering, like, okay, this sounds good, like the theory, I understand the theory, but how can I go into practice? Like, should I start in a way, or like what could be some guide for them to create their own ritual? Like, these are some things you need to consider, or like a time of the day that for you is meaningful, or an activity, like how can we guide them for them to create something simple for them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, email me, reach out if you got any questions. I'm happy to help. This is my work. Usually where I tell people is, as a place to start is look for a moment of transition in your life. It can be big transitions, right? Your kids are moving out of the house, or an anniversary, or going back to work or whatever it
Or
is.
starting a business, as many entrepreneurs are in this podcast. So maybe starting a business or.
Sure. Yeah. Starting a business. And oh my gosh, I mean, I started a business. There's so many transitions within starting a business. It's like I got my legal approval of my name. I launched my website. There's so many transitions in life, and it can even be the micro transitions. The transition from from morning into starting your day and sitting down at your computer, or the transition out of work and into and into your home again, which is, as an entrepreneur, the same thing.
Your home.
So look for a moment of transition and ask yourself, how can I slow this down, be mindful of the transition that I'm making, and elevate it as a little bit more special. And a good place to start is those 3 P's that I was talking about earlier, and asking yourself, why am I doing this? And why am I doing this? And why am I doing this? So get really clear about that, about your intention. And then think about, one thing that you could add to that moment that is not, purely functional, that just sort of feels special. Like, I brought those oats down on this gold platter. It was totally useless, but it felt a little bit more special. So it can be an object, it can be a way of doing things. I'm going to pour my coffee, and instead of pouring the coffee and then doing 10 other things, for the 4 minutes that it brews, I'm just going to stand and look at my window and be with my thoughts. It can be as simple as that. The password to my computer, I should probably change this at some point, is deep breath. And so I don't do it all the time, but sometimes I'm reminded, take one single breath, just one single breath. It can be as little and as small as that. So that's the place that I would start. Look for a transition, make it intentional, find some symbolism and a way to make it feel special.
I already have a lot of ideas from this conversation. I was like, yeah, I can do that. Especially especially the one going home. Like, I work at home. I even have in my calendar go home. And so do something for that, so that I can celebrate that the day is over and I can go back to my personal life, or I don't know, hanging out with my husband or things like that.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And if you're listening to this, and if you're inspired and you create a ritual out of this, please email me, DM me on Instagram. My email is ezra@ritualist.life, EZRA, Ezra@ritualist.life. So please let me know. I love hearing about the rituals that people create, and I'm happy to brainstorm with you a little bit as well.
Sounds great. So Ezra, to finish this conversation, I'm just gonna ask you some fire quick questions, just on top of your mind, what you can answer to. And the first one is, what is most exciting about your life at the moment?
I'm going to Burning Man next month for the first time, or next month. That's very exciting.
Awesome. What do you feel most people don't know, but you would like them to know?
This is a quick question. Come on. Fermentation is so cool and so fun, and everyone should be experimenting in the kitchen with fermenting things. And it's so much easier than you think it is, and it's so much safer than you think it is. It's not so scary. Ferment things, pickle things. It's awesome.
Have you changed your mind about something recently? If yes, what was that?
Yeah, I was actually just in Hawaii, and I always thought that I hated papaya, but I had the most delicious papaya in the world, and I'm a mild papaya believer now.
Great example. And finally, what's some quote or a phrase that inspires you right now, that you're actually living it or feeling it in your life?
there's immediacy effect. So I just heard this on a podcast the other day, and so it's top of mind. It's a quote from Voltaire, and the quote is, "God is a comedian with an audience too afraid to laugh." God is a comedian with an audience too afraid to laugh. I love that.
And now, thank you so much, Ezra, for this conversation, for sharing some of your stories, your rituals, and letting us be more clear about what is and what's not a ritual, and allowing us that like to have that permission of being open and creative and just very intentional to what we want to create. So for the ones that want to know you better, how can we get in contact, share some upcoming exciting news you have, or how to reach out to you?
Yeah, please do. My website is ritualist.life. And also, like, all of my contact and socials and everything is there. So if you don't remember anything, just go to ritualist.life. You can find it all there, because I'm on Medium and Instagram and Twitter, and I'm not on TikTok. That's maybe the only place I'm not on yet. But also follow me, DM me, and reach out and share things with me on Instagram at ritual_ist. I love when people send me things, like curated from around the internet of like, hey, saw this, thought of you, because that's such a love language for me. And also, yeah, please, on Twitter at Ezra Bookman. You'll get all the up-to-date information on the articles that I'm writing, and workshops that I'm hosting, and ways of taking this work a little bit deeper. If you want to sharpen your skills as a ritual designer, and possibly design a ritual for your new entrepreneurial life, the new company that you're founding and creating, I'll be doing a small group cohort learning journey starting in September, to learn about the design and art and science of rituals, and then to like immediately put it into practice. So you can walk away having designed a ritual, and also having created a little micro community of people and colleagues to support you in your journey. So just follow me, and I'll be posting information there.
Great. Thank you so much, Ezra. And maybe like a final message or something that you want people, if they can take away one thing about this conversation, what would that be?
I would sort of flip that around. And I would say, if you're listening to this right now, it's really easy, especially, I'm sure you're probably like driving somewhere or doing the dishes, and like you're busy and you're half listening. So just take one moment now before you end this and move on to the next thing, or move on to the next podcast. Take your hands, rub them together, and you can put them on your heart, or just wherever feels good for you. And if you're not driving, just close your eyes for 5-10 seconds and try to think to yourself, what is one thing that you heard today that you want to hold on to? A quote, a line, an idea, just one thing. And just hold it in your mind's eye and trust that you've got it in your pocket, walking with you for the rest of the day. Thank you for giving us your time and your ears and your presence to this conversation. And I am eager to hear from you and to know what resonates and what questions you have. Thanks so much. Thanks, Gaby.
Thank you, Ezra. Thank you for this, and have a lovely, lovely day. Thank you, everyone. Gracias por escucharme. Si te gustó este episodio, suscríbete o deja tu review en la plataforma que escuchas. Sígueme en Instagram si quieres conversar más, tomarnos un tecito virtual y aprender más sobre diseñar tu vida y tu negocio. Además, comparte este episodio si sabes que a alguien más le puede ayudar y le puede gustar. Nos vemos pronto en un próximo episodio de Diseño tu Vida con Gaby Ceballos.